sorry for being late. So the different presenters talked about the evidence they're seeing and that they're hearing from their clients or from the sessions and interviews that they do about the changing ability of the owner to articulate they want more of the sort of things they get from interoperable IT solutions or interoperability or the digitization benefits that have come from other parts of their business. And so that's what that session was mostly about.
Steve, do you want to add anything to that? Got a recap. So from the owner's perspective, think about what they care about. It's how well can they run their operation, whatever it is. So if they're school or an industrial facility or a commercial office building, they have specific needs. And the way in which they're communicating to us what they care about, well, because of COVID, I think everybody understands that they care a lot more about the health and well-being of the facility itself. That wasn't even really a big issue with indoor air quality 3-4 years ago, but it is a big issue now. The tenants, if you're in a commercial office facility and you've got tenants, you care about the happiness of your tenants. Well, a lot has occurred now in terms of tenant technology, in terms of amenities, in particular, occupancy tracking. All of that has emerged. You've got a lot of standalone IoT sessions, products and services now that are often focused in that tenant space. So to keep the buildings, particularly as people are trying to come back to returning to the office, they're trying to, what do I need to do to get my tenants to return? How do I keep them happy? Well, they care about the amenities, they care about the way the building operates, they care about the environment inside the building. And those, when I got into this building automation business a number of years ago, that was not a hot topic. The traditional aspects about the energy spend, certainly that continues with the rising utility costs. It's a big deal. But now they've added the additional element of carbon reduction. So if you're not prepared to address how you're going to reduce the carbon footprint, and whether that involves putting solar in place or having EV chargers on site, all of that now is, again, from the owner's perspective, something they value and want to talk about. Labor. We talked yesterday a lot about the importance of reducing the cost of running a facility. So it's fine to be able to impact the bottom line in terms of energy savings. What about the staff that has to run the building? Everyone is struggling. We had a big session yesterday around the fact, literally everyone in the room, we had over 200 people in the room, raise their hand when we asked about, are you having trouble hiring people right now? Everyone raised their hand. Okay. So, and that's certainly true at the owner level, if you will, as well. So they can't get the staff to run the buildings, which means, what do? So as an industry, we need to not just sell energy savings, we need to show where we're going to reduce the operational cost of running the systems. So that's again, a big point about the operational side is the efficiency and the cost of running the operations. And then lastly, the risks associated with having all this wonderful technology. We've probably heard a lot about cyber being one of the key risks that people are pointing out. And that certainly has come to the forefront in a variety of different sessions. There was one this morning about that in building automation. And we're seeing a lot of specifications now come out of both at the engineering level and in organizations like AHR, ISA, and many others talking about how to protect these systems from cybersecurity threats. And owners care about that. But risk management goes beyond cyber. So there's other areas that are also impacting physical security from terrorist threats. There's specialized airflow sensing now that you can do to see where, if there was a forbid, a bomb go off or some kind of a chemical agent go off into space, you can now track where that airflow is going in the facility. So this is another aspect of risk management. So these are the topics that owners care about. And the purpose of part of MondayLIVE, and certainly a big part of Coalition for Smart Abilities is say, okay, with all those needs that the owners are asking for, how do we deliver them? And our answer is really down to one key word, which is interoperability. It's fine. We've talked about integration for years, but integration does not encompass enough of what needs to be addressed here because it's evolved a lot. And it's not just interoperability from the technology standpoint, it's also interoperability from the people standpoint. We as people who are, whether we're on the supply side or on the demand side or somewhere in between, work together much, much better. We need to collaborate. Everything in MondayLIVE, everything in C4SB is volunteer. And we're trying to make this as a nexus for where we can draw in more and more participation to help solve these problems. Because we need to talk, we need to identify, and we need to go solve the problems collectively.
So, Rick, when owners ask for these things, various things that you and Steve have said, what do they get? Crickets?
You get crickets. And James Dice actually just wrote an article about that where he articulated very clearly. And so you talked about a large REIT that was looking for what I think we're now calling a fairy tale, but the fairy tale should be real. So it was interoperability, all the different levels, was open options at all the different levels, and there just aren't very many places where you can figure out who to get that from. And I've been consulting with a couple of large organizations and one particular retail company that same thing. They've got a huge RFI right now, and they're looking for the fairy tale, and they're not getting sort of responses that you would think would be available, except for the proprietary responses from the big companies that have a sort of a history of kind of a proprietary locked-in walled garden sort of technology offering. So, yeah, unfortunately, it is sort of crickets out there. But what there are options right now that are steps along the way to true interoperability at all the different levels of the smarter stack. And that's what we'd like to be able to highlight. There's evidence of, if you start down that path, you will, the stepping stones will magically appear in front of you. Not quite like that, but that's kind of the impression. It's like the more owners ask for interoperability, magically they will get it. Because as vendors, we will open up the different pieces that unlock the different interoperability components at the different levels. Technology's there. It's just maybe we haven't been, as vendors, we haven't been listening hard enough.
So we're going to move on to that now. So this was really a conversation. The initial conversation is about the demand side, right? And it's really just to show evidence that the owners are asking for different things now. They're not asking for just controls of HVAC. They're asking for essentially information systems about controls of HVAC. So we then went on to question. Sorry.
I have a question. When you say owner, who exactly are you talking about for the owners?
Repeat the question.
Who are we talking about when we talk about the owner?
Sort of a wide variety of different personas and roles that represent whether it's the owner, the operator, the manager. But
We're actually going to touch on that. If you can just wait a couple of slides. Where there's actually part of the responses actually goes to that point exactly, because there are different personas in here. So we then talked about industry initiatives, all the things that have been going on in the industry in the last couple of years. This is the panel, most of us are up here. The way we sort of structured this conversation was around the so-called 5 pillars of action that the Coalition for Smarter Buildings defined 2 years ago. And again, I'm going to hand it over to Rick.
Okay, the Coalition for Smarter Buildings is a 501c3 we formed a couple of years ago. All these people were part of getting informed and something in the audience here. But the idea or the premise was that there's something between supply and demand that is inhibiting the more rapid adoption of the technologies that would make buildings better and smarter. So got together with a bunch of different policymakers and influencers and said, what are the key things that are sort of in the way And then we created these areas of action, as you see on the screen, that were intended to start to knock down the barriers and provide better paths towards more rapid adoption. And this was the vibe that we came up with a couple of years ago. We got people together to come start working on how do we make it clear how to get better solutions or get solutions for these different barriers. Not to say that there aren't other barriers, but we've done a lot of good work showing how if we come together as an industry, we can put a better face for how the owner can better understand what it is we have to offer.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to go through these 5, and we're going to have additional comments from the panelists. The first one is interoperability. And partly to the question that you asked, we actually asked that on Monday Live by 18 months ago. Now, we talk about users and owners or clients. And at one point, we realized that there isn't just one big, massive group of people that are owners. There are obviously many different personas, but if you think about it, if you try and sort of categorize them in maybe a smaller number of categories, we came up with 2. And that is, the top line there is the 2 top layers are basically the people-centric. So the top one is the individuals or companies that are really interested in the purpose of the building, right there. And this could be an owner, a real owner that's wanting to make a profit out of their real estate, or it could be a manager of a school or a teacher of a school, or it can actually be any of us walking into TJ Maxx or something, right? We're consuming the building. So that's the purpose, right? And that's separate from what we classified as operators, who are people whose job it is to operate the building, right? So that was actually a big aha that we had. And so the stack kind of clarifies that. At the bottom, I'm going to jump to the bottom, are the two layers that are sort of obvious to us. The bottom most is the physical thing, the actual building, and the equipment and the actual physical pieces. And then above that are the different systems that control and automate those the building, the physical end. And in the middle are layers of smarts, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in terms of interoperability. So the first sort of thing to think about is this is how the industry has been behaving for the past 20, 30 years as a vertically integrated solution. Right, so Rick was mentioning sort of the big OEMs and other companies basically selling the system and the data, which is above that, the next layer above that, and what we call the exchange and the actual applications and the delivery of that, all of that to the owners. Right, so that's the past, correct? And we're moving into a more horizontal architecture that is depicted by the smarter stack here. So the smarter stack is a tool that we created to be able to talk about this, the sort of the dynamics of all of the components of smarter buildings. So the way we use this is, one example is that James Dice and others talk a lot about the independent data lane idea. Okay, great concept, right? In isolation, I think it's kind of a little bit lost, right? Because it doesn't answer all the problems. But if you put it in the stack, it's there, right? It's a piece of the puzzle that solves the data part of the architecture. Great. There are other things. James and I talk about the horizontal architecture of applications and IDL and systems underneath it. But basically, that's what we're talking about. The applications sit on the app layer, the IDLs and the data layer, obscured are different control and automation system in the system layer. Right, so we're starting to see how everything comes together. Then the question is, if we want to make these pieces communicate with each other, how do we do that? Right, and we live in a modern time and modern times, and the key sort of piece of that are APIs. We know about APIs. APIs are how these pieces talk to each other. Right. So we are promoting, and Tristan over there is done quite a bit of work on the concept of API first, and also trying to sort of figure out what constitutes a good API. Right. So there's a lot of work going on there. Then you have all of these systems, a lot of data. How does data move around? Right. And the key part of that we put in the exchange layer is semantic tagging. So Haystack, Brick, and others, basically a way to exchange data between systems. All right, so that's where it belongs there. There's another thing that's needed here, because these are all different systems that need to interoperate with each other. So you need some kind of orchestration. Sorry, I'll talk about the IoT first. There's a whole bunch of IoT solutions that's coming to market. Right, and IoTs are typically the IoT devices themselves, which is the system layer, or the SaaS service, which is an application layer. Right. Then the question is, how do we orchestrate all of that? And the answer is an orchestration, some kind of orchestration function, which is in the exchange layer. And the next question is, how do we surface all of that to the users that you're asking about? And this is where two additional concepts that have come into play, single pane of glass and digital twin. That's where they fit in the delivery. That's how it gets delivered to the users, both at the operation layer and on the purpose layer. And the way to think about all of this is that this is really a system of systems. And Glenn Humberdinger, who's here, wrote a great paper on system of systems and digital twin. I recommend that you read that to understand what that's all about. So this gives a system of systems that is flexible, that is nimble, so the system can operate over years as and when needs change of the building, which is something that really cannot happen on the left. So this is what we mean by interoperability. And a lot of work has happened or is happening to make this a reality. So that's the first pillar. Second pillar is analytics. Enno presented that, and maybe I can ask Jim to talk about that. You can read it.
Sure. So there's been a lot going on in analytics. First off, we're trying to broaden the definition of analytics to be more than just fault detection and diagnostics. In fact, broader than energy to other enterprise kinds of analytics as well. So regulatory value propositions, indoor air quality monitoring, whatever is core to that business, whatever vertical market it's in, we're interested in that. One of the big drivers we see is ESG reporting. So as that gets more important in boardrooms, it's filtering down. We see that as a big driver of where analytics technology will go. Things like ISO 50001 are some new standards that are coming along internationally for benchmarking energy and carbon. So we see those things gaining in prominence. That's carbon, that covers that one. So 2525, John Petsy and I wrote an analytics specification. We're competitors in the industry, and we got together and tried to define a table stakes standard. So if you look at the analytics business over the last 20 years, there's been a race to the bottom. You know, anyone that can throw a meter up on a screen said they were in the analytics business, but that really doesn't fly. So we had to set table stakes or a baseline level for what real analytics are and how analytics extend beyond FDD alone. So John and I wrote that spec, and other competitors worked on it as well. And now it's up there in the public domain, and we think it forms a good basis. Smart demand management, grid interfaced, efficient buildings, a whole bunch of great work going on there at LBNL and in the Department of Energy. A roadmap for that area released in May of 2021. Must read for people that are interested in that area. Obviously, AI is the talk of the town. If you're doing your homework on chatbot GPT, you'll see that people are writing code with it. It's dead serious, and will certainly have implications across all this technology in the industry. We're working towards that. What was the last bullet saying?
A promise of AI in this space.
Right, it's certainly coming, and everything from point naming and ontologies and automatically mapping buildings to, you can imagine the analytics having to generate human-related responses so that people can automatically figure out what to fix. Expect it here soon. I would say in the next 2 to 3 years. Keith Gibson with his new company is doing really well in terms of optimizing energy, optimizing BAS systems in real time with his AI now. So we're seeing it, it's here, and over the next 10-year period, I think it will become a dominant force in the industry.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Sure.
So the next pillar is specification. Rick, I think.
No, I did that.
You did that?
last time
Okay.
too. So I keep going.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so I just touched on that. Just a couple of things on Div 2525. A whole lot of people have done great work. Pete Scanlon here in the front row just finished editing a huge document, which is now publicly available. The Div 2525 work has come out of MondayLIVE, and it basically establishes operational requirements for enabling data and operational interoperability in smarter buildings. A lot of people have worked on it. Pete, as I mentioned, Ron Bernstein, Anto, Tristan, Steve Fay, Michael McMahon, David Wiltz. So a lot of really smart people have done a lot of work there over time.
Is that going to be made available to the public?
Yes, it is. And we're going to talk about that in more detail.
Thank you.
In about 10 minutes.
So others want
Just don't lose it, Tracy. Don't lose it. You got the Holy Grail there.
A lot of work.
So other stuff going on, a lot of OT cybersecurity work going on in many different quadrants in the industry. The BCS, or Building Cybersecurity Standard, is meant to be some kind of accreditation or mark that you pass a certain level of standards. That's being worked on by Lucian Niemeyer, and it's basically really a shill for the insurance industry to get a value proposition in here. I think that's extremely important. When we talk about value propositions that are beyond pure energy with analytics, think about how insurance is going to have an effect both on cybersecurity and maintenance and insuring of capital assets in these buildings over a long period of time. And a whole bunch of interest from the insurance industry on that now. It's a new revenue stream, which people in our industry haven't really spent a lot of time on before. I'll skip over the next one. BACnet cybersecurity guide. My team and a bunch of the best security architects from the industry have worked on taking BACnet Secure Connect, which came out as a standard from AHR in 2019. And we put together what's going to become a BACnet special publication on how to use BACnet Secure Connect to become an interoperable standard, so that we can have interoperability in terms of cybersecurity certificates, interoperability in how we're reporting data from building automation up into IT systems. That work is actively going on, and most manufacturers are beginning to build products on it. They're taking their BACnet SC products and putting this layer of management on top of that. Guideline 13, tremendous amount of work going on through NIST and others in commissioning of high performance sequences. I'll let Ron do it. Perfect. That's enough. Good. Thank you.
A lot of work on the specification side, which is obviously important. Procurement, which is another pillar. Talk a little bit about that, and maybe we can expand a little bit.
Well, a lot of the tools and a lot of the things that are already been mentioned kind of put into the context of how does that help procurement or transactions be exchanged differently. And again, we talk about what owners' needs are. We talk about what's been happening in terms of technology developments and specification development, and then think about it in terms of how does that accelerate the transaction happening is what this work is about. We're also identifying the different vendors who are offering things in a different way and allowing things to be bought in a different way. So although I can't see what's on the screen, again, it's a kind of a repeat of most of the things in the work that's been done, and then again, articulating it in the way of how that can speed up the transaction. As I talked about before, most of it's all about giving a framework for how to make decisions, procurement or purchasing decisions, giving framework for vendors to be able to put their solutions and their components into the right context. And then, but we're going to be spending more time in the future, because in the sessions yesterday, the theme of procurement just kept coming up over and over as like one of the most important sort of undone things in the industry. And again, my view kind of is there's a bunch of work that we had to do to get ready to be able to set the table differently for a different kind of procurement. But now that a lot of that work has been done, you can have different business models, you can have different criteria for procurement, and that's where we are right now, that threshold we're at right now.
Okay, thank you. And the last pillar is workforce, but we kind of need to reset. Just think about the supply and demand. I'm going to hand it over to Melissa.
Well, how many of you were there last night? How many of you have been in any of my sessions up till now? Okay, so before we repeat totally everything that we did before, I want to take a slightly different direction. So what role do you play in the industry right now? If you're a consulting engineer, or you work from an architectural engineering design standpoint, just raise your hand. Okay. If you operate as a systems integrator or in the systems integrator network, raise your hand. All right. What about the end user, the property manager, the owner? Okay. So one of the things that we know is that workforce is a big issue. Supply is shrinking, our supply of workers is becoming more diverse, and we have competition from other industries that are competing for the exact same skills. The challenge is on the supply side and on the demand side, how do we fix our problem? Now, if we look at what it is that we're trying to do from a workforce perspective, it is a complex topic. From the people entering our workforce, if we need them to be more diverse, if they're going to be more diverse, if they're going to come into the industry with different skills, they have to have IT skills, which serve as the spine of their job. They have to have systems thinking, which is the muscle, and they have to have good communication skills, which is the heart. And when you think about that, what does a specification look like for that worker? What does the real job look like for that worker? How do we procure that worker differently to manage rising labor costs and to be able to retain them and keep them in our workforce or for your company? And when we look at that globally and we think about how we're going to do it at scale, it can be quite complex. And so one of the things that we have done is look at what does analytics look like from a workforce perspective. What is the data that we need to understand to be able to move the needle? One of the things that we have discovered is from a messaging standpoint, we have a real challenge in communicating what we do. And when you think about the 2,467 different unique descriptions of about 8 different jobs in our industry, it confuses our audience. And it makes it very difficult for us to convey what that opportunity is. And when you look at other factors about how we train people in universities and how we educate people to be able to do this work, it becomes even more complex. Looking at it from an educational standpoint and what universities try to do to supply workers for our workforce, we also have to be interoperable. We have to be a little bit more easy to connect to and to be able to make sure that we're working with these local workforce agencies more directly. And so that is the work that we have been doing to establish standards at a national level of what would it take to be able to build a national workforce to fill the 6,457 positions that are vacant in our industry and adjacent industries. And how do we make sure that we have those people moving into the future? And it's not just a technician. It's the people that work at your company right now that have poor IT skills, that need to understand cybersecurity, might need to get an upgrade on the different impacts of AI and the work that they do. It is at the technician level, but it is also continually upskilling for the demands of technology that it has today. And so those are the topics that we talked about last night.
Thank you. Thank you. Those are the 5 pillars. There are a few miscellaneous things that's been going on that are very, very important that's been evolving in the industry. So we talked about cross-cutting activities, and Tracy's going to talk about that.
Sure. So one of the things that we figured out early on with the 5 pillars is there are some activities, some pieces of our market and the stack that don't necessarily apply or fall into a single layer. And in fact, these cut across all of these pillars and all of the layers. So these are some of the ones that we've identified here that we've been working on. ESG awareness is probably the best thing that is as far as demand for smart buildings and smart systems in a long time. I know I'm still wrestling whether this is just a buzzword, is it really going to catch on or not, but I see some financial teeth behind some of this, and it's hard to find a corporate website that doesn't refer to it at some level now. So it's really good from the standpoint it is generating that demand for our product and what we're doing. Cybersecurity is just forcing everybody's hands, right? And cybersecurity is a top to bottom problem. It's not just the electronics, it's people, it's physical structure, it's, there's a lot of attributes to that. But of course, everyone is very much aware of cyber attacks and what's going on. So that's forcing everybody's hands and doing something about that and rising to the occasion. Another thing that has been going on that we want to make sure everybody's aware of, we're here as MondayLIVE and as C4SB, but there are a lot of communities that have come forth. A number of them have been in existence for a long time. I mentioned yesterday, one not listed here, for instance, that I've been involved with is the Lawnmark community, right? And Lawnmark has been about interoperability from the very beginning. So reach out if you want to get involved to one of these communities, and you can certainly participate. Smart cities, while it's not a big topic of this conference per se, at its core is very often very much a collection of buildings, right? I realize in a true smart city application, you're pulling in other applications, trains and utilities and so forth, but at the heart of every city, there is a whole bunch of buildings there, right? So aware of that, and there are smart cities, conventions and conferences and so forth. That activity is picking up significantly. It's hard to manage and do much of anything if you can't measure it. And now more than ever, there are several good measurement platforms out there that really give us benchmarks, give us a means of comparison between how well is this building implemented versus that building, or this equipment versus that equipment even. So there's a lot of activity going on from that standpoint. And then, as Rick mentioned, C4SB is certainly all of this is at the heart of what we're trying to do with C4SB, and watch for further showcases and what we're going to focus on here moving forward. So,
thank you, Tracy. So we're going to move on to talk about the specifications in much more detail. So Pete, Ron, Mike, if you'd like to come up, and some of you can get to different seats and be part of the continued conversation. So over to you, Pete. I'll keep things going. So this is about the developing essentially a requirements and specification material that we call the DIV 2525 project. And Steve's going to explain what that's all about and why we're doing it, and we're going to go a little bit into the weeds into that.
So, very interested folks considering the gap between supply and demand realize that there needs to be some more common language from those asking for smarter buildings and those supplying stuff to smarter buildings. And we broke it down, we got it broken down into kind of three different levels of discussion. The first one on the left here is just a vision of what's possible. And so we collaborated, got a bunch of people together collaborating on creating just a short 2 to 3 page document that is intended for owners to say, oh, that's what I want. I believe in that. And so it's really, that's available at vision.div2525.org. It's publicly available right now. You can download it PDF. It's really easy to see. Circulate that. If you're an owner, take a look at it. If you serve owners, bring it with you and say, do you want that? And it's really quick to read. And they go, I would like that. The third group, I'm going to skip the middle and come back to it. The third group is ultimately, if you're going to do a project, the way construction is delivered is typically with RFPs and specification documents that say, here's what each of the vendors, each of the subcontractors need to deliver for their part of my building. So we are collecting, and this is just the beginning of the process, collecting a series of resources, sample specifications, sample projects, things like that, that people can say, oh, our school district wants to be smarter. Can we look at what another school district did and adopt it in order to go get that? So we're starting to collect that. But you can't go from the vision to writing specs right away. There's a step in between. And the step in between is to define to translate that vision and what the owner has for their portfolio into requirements, the owner's project requirements for their smarter building. So we created a framework in the middle. This is, Tracy mentioned it before, this is the document right here that the committee just finished putting together. And the framework takes the smarter stack, which we see in the background of the picture here, and it explains all the pieces. And I think this is a little bit of a build, right? Yeah. So there's the master requirements for for interoperability. What does that mean? How do you organize it from a construction standpoint, project standpoint, and then the various layers of the solution. What are the questions that if you're saying, I want that for my portfolio, what are the questions that help frame what the answers need to be? For the purpose, you define the purpose. For the people, you define who the people are that are going to interact with the building. And then I'll let Ron talk more about what the other layers do. But this document isn't all the answers. This document is the set of questions to ask. So, and the intention is that there are two audiences. One is for owners to say, oh, I believe in the vision document. Owners might not read all of this. This is about 50 pages long. It might be too deep for some, but they have something to point to. So their design team, whether they're hiring an MSI or they're hiring an architect or they have on their staff project managers who are going to implement this, they can say, I believe in that vision. Here, follow this set of questions to come up with the things we need to ask our contractors to do. So that's the intention of this. And this document it's free to use, it's free to adopt. It's available at framework.div2525.org, and you can download it. There are only only a few printed copies so far, but I do have some.
Offers of stuff, offers, you were accepting offers for that.
So, yeah, we can raffle it off. We can raffle it off. Anyway, like any project. Yeah, right, the lowest bid.
Can you just talk about the two 1995? The cross-checking?
Yeah, so are you going to? I'm going to get into the, yeah, actually, I'll let Ron explain what the different is. Great, thank you.
So that's just an explanation, basically what you just said, right? And
I think we have to.
They're all looking at my slide to figure out what they're going to talk about.
No, so this is just basically a summary of the project, and there's actually some links there that's hidden. It's basically, there's 3 links, vision.div2525.org and framework, same, and then div2525.org itself, which is a collaboration site that we built to house all of this collateral.
Maybe I can talk a little bit about this. I think it is important. The reason I put it up there, I'm actually going to stand up so I can actually see the slides. I don't know about any of you, but I find this extremely distracting. So
You tried to turn it off and
you can't turn it off?
No, we didn't.
All right. So let me just start off with, I'm Ron Bernstein, and I'm a guy that writes specifications and owner project requirements for owners. So everything we've been talking about, I've been feeling the pain for the last 12 years. So when I started my consulting company, I did it based upon the only way to move the needle that we're talking about is to get the large players in the industry to adopt this model of interoperability, integrated systems, and owner-facing projects, not supplier-facing projects, meaning that the owner defines what they want rather than the supplier just tells them, here's what you're getting, take it or leave it. Okay, so that's the world I live in, and that crosses way beyond Ashburn. And that's why I put all these up there. There's many organizations that are involved in the development of things like the Division 25 spec, even though it's a CSI. You're all familiar with CSI, Construction Specification Institute, master format, all that sort of thing. They're really bad at writing specs. They're really good at putting lists together. You know, if anybody's ever seen what's available on the CSI master format, there is no Division 25 spec. It's just a list of topics. So crossing over from CSI to AHR to AIA to IEEE and other organizations all have a little bit of a piece of the puzzle when it comes to doing this. So that's why we put this together. And our team here has been a bunch of volunteers that said, all right, some of us know how to write specs, others say, I have no idea how to write a spec, let's figure it out. So we got together and started working on this. We're volunteer-based, really to benefit the industry. I've been dealing with this for 30 years. We were talking at dinner last night. How far have we come in 30 years from where we said we would be 30 years ago to where we are today? We've come a long way. Let's not discount all the things that have happened that have gotten us to where we are. But are we there yet? No. We talked about this a little bit about the status. I do want to mention that where we are now is the first draft of this. And I would admit everybody on the team is going to say, we're not done yet. There's more work to be done on this DIV 25 framework document. But we really rushed, and thanks to Pete for all of his fantastic work of editing this and trying to get something ready for today or yesterday. But, you know, in my opinion, our team needs another round of more volunteers to help flesh out some of the detail. So realize it's going to be a living working document. And then sometime in 2023, we're going to start working on spec development and modules and things at the next level, which is those things that an owner, I would actually say before a spec, would probably focus on an owner project requirements document, which would then get handed to somebody who's going to write a true DIV 25 spec. That would be the gap between where we are. We haven't really talked about that. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, you can stop there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of these sections, and I'm actually going to go through some of the detail. If you were at the event yesterday, there was a handout, a one-page front back flyer. Did anybody get one of those? Already got one. We don't have any more of those, do we? Do we have some of those? If you could maybe pass them around, because I think that's really important. when we were working on this project, we started looking at all of these pieces of the puzzle that we talked about, overlay, the ISO stack, and how do things fit in this. And we tried to wrap our heads around, just as our committee, what goes into these things and how do we label them? What are the pieces of the puzzle and how do we label them? And we, asked the question, are we all on the same page as to what all of these things mean? And then we sat down and I created a chart, which I'm going to show in the next slide, on what each of these means in 3 sentences. And that's a little hard thing to do. So I'm going to go through those. Go to the next one. Next building. All right, so then we said, all right, who's responsible for all of this? So if we say, oh, we're going to write a master spec for Division 25, who is actually going to bid on that? Is that going to be a controls contractor? Is it a vendor? Is it a system integrator? Or again, we talk about the master system integrator. Master system integrator has actually been around since, the concept has been around since 1999. It was the very first time that we used the term. It was actually the term FMSI, which is Facility Master System Integrator. And the very first project that ever used that terminology was NASA. And I helped write the spec for that in 1999. And said we need somebody who can integrate both the process and the facilities at launching rockets at Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral. So that was the first project that ever used something that was going to do integration, because there was a specific requirement for that. But over the years, that terminology is now spread to, well, we'll make the Division 25 a separate contract that would go to a master system integrator. And then they would be responsible for ensuring that all these pieces of the puzzle were met, not only in 25, but in mechanical, electrical, VDD, low voltage wiring, voice video data, and all those other sections. So what we did as a committee is we started breaking these out and started to figure out what they were. Let's go to the next 2 bills. Just add them. We did have cybersecurity down on the bottom of 4. We said, no, that's got to be cross-cutting. As we started to get into this, we started realizing cybersecurity has elements of responsibility all the way through the stack. Same thing with networking. Now we talk about networking. We're talking the physical building automation system infrastructure. That's the wires, that's the routers, the switches, the hubs, the ports, and all of those gateways and interfaces. All of that has elements of requirements all the way through the process. So now I'm going to jump back up to the bigger picture for a second. We want to enable all of this in the DIN 2525 section, as others were saying, to enable communication to other systems through APIs. Let's go to the next build. So, one more. So we're talking about the integration of these APIs, and I think Jim has put it very, very well. There's a lot of pieces of the puzzle that we want to talk to outside of the building. Whether it's analytics, whether it's grid integration, grid interaction, greenhouse gas and sustainability, ESG things that Tracy was talking about. A lot on the procurement side, who's responsible, who's tracking, who's checking, work orders, workforce development, not only that, but tracking workflow and errors. All of those things could, and sometimes very commonly, are outside of the building. We need to interface to them. So now this DIN 2525 gives us a platform for how to develop those applications that are going to use the data and use the information inside the building. Next slide. So this is what's on that sheet. Did you find some? Okay, so if we're out, this is what's on that sheet. I put it up here. I didn't know we were going to have these, but I highlighted the things that are important in each one of these divisions. Now, I thought I would go through and highlight some of them here, but with this thing, I'm not going to do that. I will just let you know that each one of these sections has very specific purpose. It's directed to a specific entity or a subset of entities, so that you have consistency from the application developer, from the system controls contractor and the data flow, the governance and the methodology of who's going to transfer information from one section to another, as well as the format of that. We talked about Project Haystack and Brick and the semantic interoperability. All of those kind of rules fit into all of these. So without taking too much more time, we'll go to the next slide. So if you look at this from a stack model, there are other standards that are out in the industry that this is modeling, and I want to go to the next slide, is that we are following something that refers to the AHR Guideline 13, which is a 4-tier architecture. So AHR Guideline 13 is specifying building automation systems. And we're basically modeling, if you could actually see what's behind here, you've got layer 4 down on the bottom, which is the sensors and actuators. Layer 3 is controls. Layer 2 is the infrastructure for that controls, the networking side of it. And the layer 1 is the BMS, the building management system, front end, and the enterprise. That's a larger picture. That follows exactly the 4-tier model that's in the AHR Guideline 13. So we've adopted that so that we're not, again, confusing the industry. The AHR Guideline 13 kind of lays out how projects are to be designed from a specification standpoint, and it basically says what I just said here. In fact, in the AHR Guideline, we use the term FMS, Facility Master System Integrator, going back 30 years. So when you're laying out a project design, if you look at this from the 4 tiers, 1, 2, 3, and 4, we can identify the requirements as separate and individual contract pieces that could go to separate and individual entities working on a project. So this tier 4 might be an electrical contractor wiring all your sensors and actuators. Your tier 3 is all your equipment suppliers. Your tier 2 is a controls integrator. And your tier 1 is the master system integrator. That might take, fire, life safety, energy metering, gas detection, water, lighting, HVAC, and we bring them all into one pane of glass and provide the APIs for all of that to bring that out into an enterprise. Excellent. All right, so the CSI master format. How many folks are really familiar with the CSI master format? Okay, less than half. The CSI master format is a big piece of work, in both literal and contextual. Build that out. Next. Click. So what you can't see here, because it's covered up, are all the different divisions of the CSI master format. And this thing actually goes down to about here. I had a build slide that would bring it all up to show it. What we're trying to do is make sure that the 25 section is that we have references to where information needs to go in other divisions. Because you can't just say, oh, here it is, 225 contractor, you're going to do this without coordination. So one of the big things I'm proponent of is a master responsibility matrix for a project that has all the divisions and all the entities involved, from all the way from the building owner standpoint, from the project requirements, the design phase, the construction implementation phase, and the commissioning phase. And if you build that out, all of these different pieces of the puzzle have elements in this division 25 section. Next slide. All right, so one of the other things we've talked about is the cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a cross-cutting that touches all elements, all layers of this, from not only a technical standpoint, but an implementation and owner responsibility, things like making sure passwords and ports and IP addresses, all of that is done in an accurate way. And it really does go from the physical layer all the way up to the enterprise. We don't have time to get into all the details on that. There's a lot of good work going on in that. Yesterday was the AHR Cybersecurity Task Force meeting, setting on that, and starting to collect more information there. Guideline 13 has a really, I want to say good, but I want to say encompassing chapter on cybersecurity. So if you're interested in that, you might want to keep your eye out for the April issue of the AHR Journal. I'm writing an article with Daniel Shepard on cybersecurity. We're going to extract information out of that chapter as a feature article for the AHR Journal. Next slide. That's it. Did I get what you wanted?
That's perfect. Thank you. So I want to turn it to Mike McMahon. You work for Newcomb and Boyd. So you put together specifications. Can you sort of tell us your thoughts? You've been involved in the 25, your thoughts of it and how useful it is and how does it play with writing specs?
Sure. Yeah, thank you.
I'm gonna stand up too, I've been doing a little too much sitting. So, as we're consulting engineers, we take the art of the possible and we tell people how to make it possible. So if a owner comes to me and says, I need a widget and a thing and a process to move 3 sheets of paper from the center of the table to the other end of the table, our engineers can map that out, right? But what if they need to move 7? It was designed for 3. And the consultant comes in and says, why are you still using paper? Right, at some point. So what I love about the framework is that it establishes those lists of questions that should be asked during the inception of the process. Because you've already set your budget as an owner, as a developer here. And when those questions get asked, and then they need to be solved is over here. So now how do you go back and pay for those things? That should be taken into consideration. There are certain things called protocols, and especially in State Department, protocol officers responsible for going and meeting with another country and setting and establishing the standards through which they will communicate when they do meet. So for instance, you don't go to Japan and get somebody in a big bear hug the first time you meet them, right? That's just not a thing. And a lot of people know that, some people don't. What I love about the framework and the participation in this is that it makes my job easier. So as a consultant, as an engineer, I'm a tech dork. I love to figure things out and make things work, and I have a lot of fun doing that. But I need information. I need data. I need to know what it is that you want. What are my boundaries, right? I can engineer anything you can pay for. What do you want? What's my limit? The framework is what started as a conversation amongst some people that found they had a like problem with the industry. And so they got together and one of them said, hey, maybe we should do something about this. And then they started to build out a framework, say, okay, well, we need to address this and we need to address this. Well, let's pull in this smart guy. Maybe we'll pull in these people over here. And they kind of came together and formed a village. So version 1.1, to your point, is 1.0. We need the feedback. Now we're taking it from the village and we're taking it to the big town. And then from the big town, we're going to go to the big city and we're inviting feedback. And we want more participation. We want the socialization of this so that everybody, like that protocol officer is doing, we're trying to set the standard in the industry for how people can communicate effectively, what their needs are and what they're going to get on the tail end. And that's one of the reasons why I love to participate in this, is because it's facilitating that effort. And it's going to make everybody's lives a little bit easier if we can all communicate using the same language and interface with each other and understand, understand the stack. I said this last night, understand the stack, right? You have to understand at least from a high level, the whole thing, but know your role as an individual contributor in the stack. So for folks like Ron and myself, we understand and know the whole stack because it's important to be able to deliver the outcome. Technology is an enabler. That's all it is. It's an enabler that achieves an outcome. And what those series of outcomes are, if I can reduce the amount of technology to do it and the amount of processes and overhead, then everybody wins. Then you get something more efficient. So now, not only did I design for 3 sheets of paper to move from the center of the table, I have the capability through open architecture, open standards, etc., because my approach was tailored to know that your vision is to expand, right? Your vision is to take that concept of 3 sheets and maybe one day not use paper, which would be the ultimate goal, which ties into the ESG. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I participate in the framework, and I think it's so great. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. This is kind of the end of the presentation, so we'd love to get questions from the audience. So anybody have any questions or comments? Scott.
So we spend a lot of time in front of MEPs trying to help them understand the need for, I'm just curious, like there's a huge gap. You guys are professionals and you guys do a great job at the consulting level, but how are you guys addressing the lack of understanding at the majority of the people at the MEP level? You know what I mean? Because we deal with everybody, right? And you guys are at the top 1% in terms of this, and this makes all the sense in the world. But if I took this to 9 out of 10 MEPs in Detroit, they're not gonna use this because because they just don't put the effort, they don't have the time, you know what I mean? I'm just curious as a group, have you guys talked about that, or is there an effort to help with that?
And let me take it from my perspective, and I think Mike will do a great job on his perspective. So I looked at that for about 15 years as to how do we move the consulting engineering market to adopt interoperability, open systems, multiple vendor choices, reduce risk.
And now it's how do we get them to do cybersecurity? How do we get them to put a proper network spec together?
Yeah,
I mean, it keeps getting harder, right, as time goes on. And they're still asking, can I use the pneumatics? No, you don't, so.
So I went at it a different way. So I think a few of us who've been doing this for a while said, we've got to do it a different way. We've got to go after the owner that has the pain point, because we're not going to change the industry by pushing. It has to be through a pull. So if you were there yesterday, you heard about we diminish the cost and the value of good smart control systems unless the owner has a pain, has a desire and a need, and is willing to pay for it. Then we won't make the change unless that happens. So all the work that I do in my firm is specifically and only to large end users. And I get involved in the process long before a new employee gets in the middle of it, except for the project they're working on now. They both been after. But Mike and I are actually working on a project here in Atlanta that started about a year before I was ever brought in. But most of the work that I do is the owner has a problem. They don't necessarily like, nothing against employment, unless they like going directly to the architect and the consulting engineer without a good requirements document. Before that, get the requirements to the owner. And the owners, and I'll come back to this, the owners that are really motivated are the ones who own their buildings, operate their buildings, have a long-term strategy, and are not REITs. Sorry, I've tried working with REITs for years. I will not do it. It's just not there yet. Not until the occupant tells the owner of the building, this is what I will pay for when you design your building, because this is what I want. But mostly public sector work, owner occupied, large footprint. Those are the ones who are going to drive the market. A lot of the standards we've been talking about have been coming and filtering down from folks like NASA, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, the oil and gas industry. New York City Schools was one of the very first to adopt a true multi-tier architecture. In their model, they said, if you're going to bid on the front end, you cannot bid on any one of our 1,600 buildings. If you're going to bid on our buildings to upgrade, you cannot bid on the front end. And they were completely separating that. That was one of the first big projects for Atlantic Facade. They're still doing that. They've done 500-600 buildings, and they've got 1,600 to do. So,
yeah. So, and that's a struggle that we've been through. I've been through. So my role is an intelligent building consultant, and yes, Nick McBoyd is an MEPT, so mechanical, electrical, plumbing, technology, and I'm on the technology side. It is a paradigm shift for the MEPs. So when I'm writing a Division 25 spec, I do what's called a peer review process. Give me all of your specs and submittals that were designed by others, other MEP firms, et cetera. I don't care, whoever it is, give it to me, because I have to ensure interoperability. First and foremost, I'm going to take a look at your performance-based spec, or if you're quoting specific hardware, and I'm going to say, you know what, this doesn't work because it's lacking conformity to the big vision, right? So until that big vision is stabilized and communicated all the way down that this is part of our OPR, this is part of my requirement as an owner, I mean, see that as a liability and a risk. Yeah, is it the smart thing to do? Yes. Are they required to do it? Is it probably going to get value engineered out because it wasn't in the budget over here? Yes. And I go through that all the time, right? So it gets introduced a little bit later on in the project, and they're like, oh, halfway through, I want 7 sheets of paper. All right, cool. Let's go down the path. The stuff that you were going to buy here isn't going to work. Let's change it out for some over here. And then you do that, everything will work fine. Oh, I don't have any money for that. Okay, right? So that's that disjointed nature, and it's that impetus that's going to drive the change for everyone that's involved in a construction project. In my past, previously, I worked with a developer out of Detroit, and they said, we want to put in smart building stuff. We want all of these things to talk to this one software platform, right? And I said, yeah, no problem. I'm a network engineer. I'm a network architect by trade. Like that's my job, is to make things talk, right? So I came in and I said, okay, these are the requirements you're going to need to meet in order to be able to do that. This is the funding. This is how you're going to have to do it. And it was successful. It was successfully done. They had to change and write a playbook on how to get it done. And they did it within their organization. They rolled it out to over 120 buildings, right? Based off of the first 6 that we did. This is no different. This is what we're hoping to accomplish here, is by giving the industry the ability to talk the same language, to understand everybody's roles. Kind of like a less informed RACI, if you will. But, again, those are the types of tool sets that we develop as consulting engineers and intelligent building consultants that create the RACI, but it brings everybody and has them understand their role, what's going to be required of them, so that we can package it all together and say, here you go, guys. Here's the playbook for everybody.
I want to make one more point I forgot, which is in the design phase, when you have your architect, you have your consulting engineers, and you have your subject matter experts. I'm a big proponent of bringing in your master system integrator at that point under a design assist contract. Mm-hmm. So the design assist contract is separate from the implementation contract and different budget line items, but you get the entity who's actually going to be doing the work involved in your design decisions and working with your MEP.
And owner direct, right? That's key.
Well, it could be, in some cases, it could be through the GC. Okay. So the MSI or the project is
or the architect.
Or the architect, it could be through the architect, but sometimes either one. I think more common maybe through the GC because they're going to do implementation. But that design assist phase says we have a seat at the table. It's like, you're going to push 3 pages of paper. We can do 7. Oh, we didn't know that. How much more is that going to cost? Oh, what are the technologies that we could implement in order to do more of what you want and still get within that budget level? If you don't do that, then you're basically sitting there saying, oh, MSI, go do this project. And you said, okay, here's what we're told to do. We'll go do it. And here's what the costs are going to be.
Great. Sorry, I'll either come up and grab a microphone. Yeah. So part of what the coalition is intending to do, it's going to take the whole darn thing, is also a thing called the showcases that we're putting together to be able to, now that we've got the framework done and all this work that's been done with these guys, we're actually going to go ahead and take a bold step of saying, here's some examples of where it's working. So for the owner and for the MEP and for distributors and whoever, there can be like this growing list of examples of where we're getting closer to plug and play. So the show and tell is kind of like what I'd like to talk about. But we had to get the framework created first. We had to get the definitions created. We had to have legitimate, spec writers create the examples. But then we're going to grow this list of, again, taking like a bold step of saying, here's where it's working. Here's examples of good APIs, of good interoperability, of good data sharing, and we're going to highlight that. And that's part of what is for the good of the community, is to take this good work that's been done and then take people on field trips and do show and tell about, okay, here's examples. So that people can't say, well, I don't know what it looks like, because I've been in this industry for a long damn time too, and it's like, well, I don't know exactly. What does that exactly look like? Or what is that? It's like, well, here it is. Here's one that's working. And so that's part of what the coalition is going to do, is a thing we're calling the brand showcases.
Can I throw something in for consideration?
Yeah.
For the coalition to consider is education. So you guys have built some really good stuff here, and it'd be great if you guys were able to help us, help educate the end users, the MEPs, but then also the BAS contractors. It's sort of like we need a lot more education on all this for the industry. It's very rough right now.
It's really about socialization, right? Awareness that this thing exists, and then it follows with education.
Well, nobody documents it. Nobody, Lauren in one of our prior panels from Acuity mentioned, who's the adult in the room? You know what I mean? So it's like, we kind of need more adults out there saying, okay, this is something that a lot of people accept, and here's some training to help you understand it.
We talked about that extensively, day before yesterday in the Guideline 13 committee, and also in a couple of other committees on the ASHRAE side, of bringing this concept and presented some of this there to the educational institutions where our younger engineers are coming from. So we had a YEA, for those who know YEA, Young Industrial Engineers, meeting, and there was significant interest from maybe 20 or 25, kids, I call them kids, but students still in university looking for information about controls and control engineering and IT versus OT. There's a tremendous opportunity. The challenge is how and who and where and how do you build that? And what does it look like? We're starting to think about that. I think that's a very good thing. I mean, I've been doing training level for over 15 years and have online training classes for it. But to get it out socialized at the large engineering schools, there's some hurdles. And Melissa mentioned some of those yesterday.
So I think there was a question from somebody back there.
I was just going to make a comment. I think, when it comes to specifications, I don't know if they don't teach specifications in university, I don't believe. Because I know I started as a consulting engineer, and how you learn is you're given a spec to go review shop drawings, and you're trying to see if it meets. And on every project, they're going and grabbing old specs to try to use, and they're spending very little time. So when you actually look at these building automation systems, you got to look at how the specification system fails. I'll say 90% of the consulting engineers out there don't know how to write a spec. They don't know how to read a spec, and it's very difficult to be able to tell whether or not the product that they're reviewing even meets the spec, unless it's the one that they designed. If they designed it, then it's easier. So now you're talking about trying to integrate from mechanical contractors, electrical contractors, and everyone else, and then the contractor's going to push back on you and say, well, I didn't bid that. And then if you didn't bid that, then how are you going to find the money? Because everything's value engineered, and value engineered doesn't align with a smart building.
Well, I think part of the challenge is the generation of specifications doesn't necessarily, from control specifications, doesn't necessarily start at the MEP. It starts at the vendor. So the vendor specs are out there, have been out there for years. The last time I looked at one, there's still, B.20 modems, and we were talking yesterday about dot matrix printers and Windows NT and Windows 95, and on my project it's PDP-11s. I'm working on now with the PDP-11. So you were looking at old, recycled DDC technology when they first came out. That's been recycled over the years, but writing specifications is not for the faint of heart. For someone who's done it for the last 10 years, it's not for the faint of heart. It is not something you just say, well, I'm going to sit down today and write a spec and I'll have it done next week. No, it takes a long time to do it. But once it's done, you have something to hang your hat on. But it has to start at the owner. As I said, you can't tell an MEP that you're going to just recycle your spec unless the owner tells that entity, you've got to do what I want. Get them engaged in the process. Because if you start asking the right questions, they will give you the right answers. Absolutely. Get their facility maintenance and engineering personnel involved. They'll tell you what they hate about their current system or what they don't want to see, and they'll tell everything. But they're not involved normally in the long-term process. It's a design build project or bid spec project, and there's lots of people up above. You got to get those guys involved very early.
Yeah, there needs to be the impetus for change, right? That's the key. If I'm a building owner and I'm going to build the same building the same way I've done it for the last 20 years, why should anybody change, right? I did the same thing in my career. I left healthcare and I decided a company that was going to do HIPAA audits, right? Everybody's familiar with HIPAA now, but back then it was a thing, but there were no teeth behind it. So everybody's like, why should I do it? It's not going to hurt me. Now it's $5,000 per occurrence, up to $2 million, right? So I was a little ahead of my time there, but there's no teeth behind it. There's no interest to it. If the owner demands this level of interoperating integration, that will follow. The education will follow because they have no choice. Because in order for me to get hired and deliver the product, I have to uplift myself. And like I mentioned, in Duke and Boyd, when I first came on board 2 years ago, these are concepts that we as a firm knew and adjusted to. We've been tweaking them along the way to say, this is following the program. We need our designs to be able to commit here. You don't stop here. And there is no recycling of specs, right? Anybody who recycles a spec, that's just a big no-no as far as we're concerned. But not every industry does that. And so that's why I point back to the MSI, the role of someone who's the parent in the room, right? Who's overseeing the entire project, as you had that slide up there. It's really a parabola that fits over the entire project that points back to them. they're the ones that should be responsible for making sure that it's all the way through. And the way to do that is to get them in early in the design for consulting, because they're going to bring that knowledge and point out to the people that are designing all this, that this is a requirement. That's going to really force change.
So one of the questions that the project talked a lot about is different types of buildings, different sizes of buildings, and different complexities of buildings. So there's sort of a perception that what we're talking about is only good for big buildings. Can I get one of you to talk, maybe Rick, because you're older?
I'm happy to talk about that. Can you put that slide up on?
Okay, I do.
That one. So when we start looking at this, I'm going to take this again from the AHR guideline to our treatment approach, because I think it's a brilliant approach. What we said is, all right, we can't make an assumption that when you're writing a spec, it's going to fit all buildings and all scenarios. So we started with how could we contract the requirements for the simpler buildings and then extend them. So we basically did like a PowerPoint build. You start off with a simple building. These are the minimum requirements for cybersecurity, for integration, for interoperability. Very basic level. And then we outline what types of buildings fit into that. I think they're down here in the smaller, simpler buildings. Gas stations and convenience stores in a small school or an outbuilding, or just a small single building. And then also we overlaid on that, what is the usage of that building? What kind of information and what kind of security was needed? So it could be a small building that has a high level of security. What kind of building is that? A bank, right? You got, just think about it that way, versus a small building like a restaurant, a fast food restaurant. Not a lot of, the most important thing that's in there is the cash register and the money coming in, and with credit cards now, it's credit card information. So you have to look at it from a risk standpoint, from a risk mitigation standpoint, and then also from a use case. So we started from that level, and we defined the basic requirements in a spec for that. Then we went up to the next level, to the moderate building. What do we need to add? With the assumption that you're going to do everything in layer 1, we're going to now add to layer 2 a moderate building. We put out those suggestions, and then some use cases for that, some sample spec language. And then we went up to a 3rd tier, and then eventually said there's a 4th tier 2, which is like a highly secure government building that needs even more. But along the way, we said, all right, you're not going to be able to do all things to all people, but you have to do your assessment first. I think that is also the guide spec here, is that you've got to do your assessment. Who are you? What's important? What's your level of risk? And frankly, what's your level of paranoia? I always like the paranoia. What happens if? And if you do that, what happens if analysis, then you'll start to see what pieces do you need to put in, not just on cybersecurity, but what information do you need? Do you need a HIPAA reporting? Do you need some sort of agency reporting? Is that reporting real time? Are you in the food service industry where you need to know whether food is spoiled and report that out? And if that information is coming from your control system, well, you better have a higher level of reliability than just, hey, the ice cream melted in the freezer because someone opened the door.
Now, is that information publicly available?
The guideline 13 is.
It has it in the guideline 13?
Yes, absolutely. Guideline 13. Yeah, I wrote that whole section. Cool. I think it's actually pretty good. Have quite a few people in it.
Maybe you touch on cybersecurity, or
absolutely. There's an entire chapter just on cybersecurity. Cool. And cybersecurity from both the physical attack vectors and the logical attack vectors.
Okay.
Most important, people think about, we'll solve all the problems just by putting more, cybersecurity implementation, TLS and certificates. The number one attack vector for a building, a control system on a building, is the physical vector. Somebody gets into the building with some piece of equipment that they shouldn't and plugs it into the network, and something happens. So we take it from the physical and the logical side to find those elements and things that you could do, and again, tier it into small, medium, large. I think we use simple, moderate, complex, and ultra complex.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, any other thoughts or questions?
If I could just add, listening to all this conversation, and I've seen the same problem that Scott was talking about as far as adoption. And what I've kind of resolved myself to believe and think is that this is really as much about a movement towards a goal. And if all of the framework that we're talking about here makes somebody implement something that looks a little bit more like an open interoperable system, even if it doesn't follow the spec all the way, I think is a step in the right direction. So MEPs, I get what you're saying completely, might not want to implement the spec and everything and all, everything legally that goes along with that, obligations contractually. But if you can use that framework as a guidance to implement your system more like this, if you can, or in your specs that you're using, look for opportunities to start to move that more and more towards something that looks like this. And if we can achieve that going forward, at least we've got the ball rolling in the right direction, right? So something to keep in mind for everybody. I run into that with the small buildings. You're talking about small buildings. Nobody does a Division 25 spec on a restaurant, QSR, right? But interoperability and data exchange and integration of IoT devices and that data is something they're aware of and something that they want to, incorporate into their future. Restaurants going more and more digitized. Nobody's talking about Division 25 spec though, but the principles in this framework all apply completely. So,
yeah, and I would add to that, Tracy, it doesn't necessarily have to be a Division 25 spec, and I think I talked with where Steve is and Pete. We chose this Division 25 as Anto will attest to. It was a home that we put, a stake in the ground in. But it doesn't have to be a Div 25 spec to even do this. It doesn't have to be Div 25. It could be called an owner's design requirements document. It could be, something that really, don't get hung up, it has to follow Division 25, it has to be CSI format. No, I don't believe it does. This document, you pull out all Division 25 nomenclature, it's a standalone document for a requirements document. However you do that, whether it's in a quick serve restaurant, could be, here's the basis of design for how our systems are going to communicate, and has nothing to do with construction. It's done through an IT department. That's way past construction, says these are the things that are required from the equipment, and this is how we're going to integrate that after it's all built. So don't get hung up on that. Use it as a framework,
which is what it is. So I think that I'm going to make one sort of comment as we close. A lot of this is kind of a process, and one of the things I'm going to point out is we use the term smarter and smarter buildings. Coalition for smarter buildings, not smart buildings. I just want to explain why we do that. And this was a big aha about 2 years ago on MondayLIVE when we were discussing sort of challenges, and we're saying, the question we were trying to figure out is why are people not doing smart buildings, right? And then I kind of looked at that word smart buildings, right? So I asked two questions. If you ask 100 people in the room what they mean by smart buildings, you're going to get what? 200 answers, right? It's really, really difficult to specifically define what it is. The second thing is that it's actually very, very hard, right, to make a building smart, especially all the different technologies. So we are asking people we're asking people to do something really hard, and we can't explain what the end result is or the end vision is, right? So that's a recipe for failure, right? If we just add those two letters, ER, at the end of it, we're talking about smarter buildings, right? So any of you can go to a building and do something, and the building will be smarter, right? And the next person or the next cycle, whatever it is, will make it smarter. So over the course of time, up and down the smarter stack, the building gets smarter and smarter as we get smarter together.